As Leslie said, thank you very much for coming. And it's not just the author that appreciates it, it's us in Sparsa who appreciate it as well, because it does make a very big difference to us and, as Leslie said, especially to the author. I don't know if all of you know our publishing house. It's quite small. We were set up specifically to try and find a home for the kind of high quality literature that doesn't easily fit in with the more modern genres that the larger publishing houses tend to have to stick to because of their size. We really don't care about the genre, we don't care about the style of book, and we publish both fiction and non-fiction. What we do care about is excellent writing. And we will not consider anything that we don't think meets our rather exacting standards, but we think it's important. And because of that, we've been lucky enough to find a home for quite a number of writers and some excellent books that would almost definitely never have been published otherwise. So we're quite proud of what we do, and we couldn't do it without the audience that both buys the book and, thank you very much, turns up for these events. Stephen's book is it's a perfect example. It might have been written specifically for us. It has elements of science fiction in it, but it's not science fiction. It has biblical elements in it, but it's not religious. It is hilariously funny in places, but it's not a comedy. It literally fits into no genre. And it's actually quite difficult when you're filling in the details for the national databases, and they want, as does Amazon, the genre that you want to put the book into. And there's nothing that covers everything in some of the books that we have, and that's very true of Stephen's. Now, as you may see, he's being very careful not to infect all of us with his rather strange, surreal form of writing by wearing a mask. But I hope that you will all welcome him, and once he has finished his talk, there'll be plenty of time for questions if anybody has any, and at the end there will be books for sale, and he will be more than happy to sign any for anyone that wishes. So, if I may, thank you again, and I'll hand you over to our author, who is, after all, the only reason you're here.
So, thank you very much for that wonderful introduction. Actually, today I remembered that Sparsile is relating to a star that doesn't fit in a constellation. And I actually tweeted today about like the idea that my book didn't fit into any genre. I put hashtag marketing nightmare. So relying on you guys to do the marketing side and get it into bookshops, even if there isn't a shelf labelled Bible punk or whatever. But before, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the book. But before I do that, I'd just like to first of all thank you to Waterstones for hosting the event, and thank you to, of course, Sparsile, the publisher, Leslie F. Rossman, and Jim Campbell, and also Stephen Cashmore, and Wendy Ross. So and in fact everyone at Sparsile who had the faith in Beelzebub's Bible to help bring it into actual reality, which it is now. So thank you for that. Also, I'd like to thank you, everyone else, for turning out on this dark November night in Glasgow, and thank you for turning up. I came to realise that I'd be talking to some people who know me very well, but who know next to nothing about the book, and some people who know quite a lot about the book, but know next to nothing about me. And then there's some other people, I suspect, who don't know anything about either. And that's okay. You're all very welcome, and welcome to join me on this literary journey. So as in the style of these things, I have some readings from the book, because the book is here. I can read from it. So I've got 3 short readings, and I'll have some talking in between. I have some talk in between. I'll say a little bit more about the book and about how it came to be written. At the end, I can take some questions, and the book is actually on sale today for the first time over there, and there's a table there with a pen ready to sign any books that anyone would like signed. So, so what is this thing, Beelzebub's Bible? Well, it's made up of essentially 21 stories, and it's a bit like the Bible in this respect. It's got different stories in it, but they all kind of link up, but they could all be written at different times, different places, maybe by different people, but they all kind of come together in a single canon, if you like. Yeah, the first story I'm going to read from is the first story in the book. It's called The Bible of Babel, and it's set in ancient Babylon, when the earth is just a few hundred years old, obviously, when the cities have just been invented not so long ago, and in fact writing has only just been invented, and I guess Bibles are only just being written down. So I'm going to do a short reading from this. Okay, so no one thought the Lord God would just turn up one day and go on a downtown walkabout. After all, he hadn't been seen since biblical times. But when he finally turned up and set foot in the city to see for himself, the people were filled with wonder and dread. People imagined the sky falling, towers crashing down, the city ruined, the end of civilization. Never quick to reward human initiative, the deity was ever suspicious of what man would get up to when left to his own devices. And this city is the greatest assembly of human devices ever devised. If anywhere demanded a personal visit from a curious, restless, or disgruntled almighty, then it was going to be here. For this is the greatest city the world has ever known. It's the most artificial place, that's to say the most human place, on the face of the earth. At the top, the ruling classes and their entourages of advisors and hangers-on, and celebrity astrologers and lifestyle gurus. And then the brash nouveau riche of the urban professional classes. Who are they? The money men, and record keepers, and wheeler dealers and pen pushers. People living their artificial lives, knowing nothing of the toil of the land, their rustic past, of nomads or Nephilim, or the humble earth from which they sprang. Then below all of them, there's the great mass of the sweating, swarming metropolis, living for the buzz and bling and booty of the big city. This city, where every kind of human desire is stimulated, indulged, flaunted, exploited, exhausted. The city, where people invent sins faster than they can be forgiven. In this age of atheism, the Lord God had, frankly, become a bit of an anachronism. Until this morning, he was lost from living memory. The days when God walked and talked with the people seemed a million miles away. But today, since first light, there were rumours of the Lord stalking through the southern suburbs. And the people were afraid. But I was thrilled. This could be the biggest story of my generation. The most shocking, awesome breaking news for centuries. It's my job to write things down. Yes, I am the first to be able to record it, just as it happens. Balancing against the possibility that the world may be about to end, I am the first person to record an eyewitness account of the deity in an urban environment. So I guess this story and several of the stories invite us to think, what if? So like, what if the Bible was actually true? What if these things happened in the way they seem to have been recorded as happening? So in this case, the Bible would be written and sort of made up as they went along. Just a few chapters. So the Bible would be a skinny little thing in these days, so Bible studies wouldn't be too onerous for people at school, and religious education would be a matter of obeying the first commandment, go forth and multiply. So that might be fun. A second story in the book, Eve and Eden, is in effect asks, what if the first woman didn't accept the dominance of man, of men over women. So it invites us to ask, what if the Bible saw women and men as true equals from day one, and not due to some kind of rib transplant? So how different then would the world be? A better place, maybe? And so it goes on. The Beelzebub's Bible is in 4 phases. The first phase is set in the times of Genesis, covering from the Garden of Eden to the Tower of Babel. The second phase features the rest of the Old Testament, or Hebrew Bible. So, for example, in the story Confessions of a Teenage Bible Basher, the narrator describes their naive understanding of the Holy Book as adult literature. So it's full of sex, violence, cursing, horror, monsters, and science fiction. Like, what more could a teenager want from literature? Or a holy book, for that matter. Another story in this phase is the counterfactual story, Baal's Bad Dream, that asks what it would be like if Western culture had adopted Baal as its preferred Canaanite god, rather than a rather misogynist or homophobic god like Yahweh. So we might have a society that was built in a completely different set of morals, but how would we know any different? Because we'd be following those rules instead. Then in the third phase of the book, a guy called Jesus comes along, and we enter the kind of Christian era proper. So it's only about halfway through the book that we enter the Christian era, with the story Zombie Messiah 2, which is the Hollywood treatment of Jesus' life and times. And of course, for some, Jesus was a local preacher, a local Jewish preacher, I should say. For some, Jesus is the Son of God, and for some, he is God. And this can all be a bit confusing for some of us. If you just met him, or were dating him, and were going to meet his family for the first time, which is the setting for my second reading. It's called Meeting the Gods-in-Law. So I'm going to try and project here, although the voice isn't a loud voice in the book, but I have to make it this way. So it's all nicely casual and cozy. Just me, God, his mother, and of course his father, God Senior. I'm still a little nervous though. After all, it's the first time I'm meeting my long-term partner's parents, the prospective gods-in-law. We arrive in good time at God's parents' lovely old townhouse in South Jerusalem. Our introductions are a little self-conscious. How do you correctly address the Mother of God, after all, or God the Father when the Son is in the same room? Just call me Father, he says. I compliment the gods on their beautiful flowers and vines in their garden, and we soon settle down to a lovely evening on the roof terrace. God Senior has an instant sense of presence, with his gaunt face and shining eyes, but he's shorter than I imagined. He's conservatively dressed, with the look of a time-served ex-military character who could still be handy in a fight. God's mum turns out to be quite the hostess, with a wonderful supper of spicy carrot soup, smoked tuna, shakshuka, and homemade bread. God supplied the wine on our behalf. I've also brought some fresh figs from our little garden, and God's mum smiles and seems to appreciate the gesture. I'm still not sure of the history between God's parents, which always seemed a bit of a mystery, even to God. So the elder God causes a wind to blow on the surface of his soup, and we settle down to the meal. Soon enough, my prospective in-laws are asking me all the usual questions, about my family, my parents' business, my relationship with God. Our conversation sails along the surface swimmingly, though it doesn't take long for things to turn personal. At one point, God's mum asks straight out if I'm pregnant, although I suspect she's really more interested in if I'm a virgin. I say, not as far as I know. So that's getting towards the Christian era there, I suppose. So what about the author then? So you may be wondering, Who is this guy? Is this guy some kind of religious fanatic? Or maybe worse, a fanatical atheist? I would say neither. I think I would say I was no more or less religious than the next person. But it's all around us. Religion is all around us. It's in our culture. Even like in school, where I understand it's still compulsory for people to be taught religion in school. I guess probably broadcasting has to cover religion in some form. Even the state is linked somehow. Occasions such as coronations. The head of state apparently answers to a higher authority. So we can't help asking ourselves, who is this guy? Who is this higher authority? Who's his boss? Is God. So we can't help questioning, I would say. Whether we like it or not, we're exposed to religion. And so I can't help thinking, well, what about it? What's going on here? And questioning it. So I'd say that the research for the book did require quite a lot of reading, quite a lot of the Bible, more than I'd ever done before, and much of it for the first time. I guess I wasn't so much interested in the bits of begetting families and histories of kings and chronicles and sermons telling us to be good and all of that kind of thing, but more the fantastical parts of it. So I quite enjoyed reading the book, writing the book, as it allowed me to cover not only religion but some more fancy elements. And those who know me may notice a few things that might strike a few chords, such as a Victorian steam-powered space trip to Venus and Mars, or hell located underneath the city streets of Edinburgh, with steam trains thrown in, palaces with harems and dungeons, carnivorous plants, and cannibalism. And I think I said I'd mentioned cephalopods and capybara as well. That's just for one or two people who know who they are. And all sorts of monsters and sinning aliens, and even an invertebrate messiah. So the book allowed me to go into all those areas beyond the Bible. So the book is not just influenced by the Bible, of course, but a number of other works, like from Paradise Lost to Trainspotting, where there's one story that's like a collision between the two, resulting in Paradise Failed, or another word beginning with F. I've also written, I also have a blog, as we do these days. The authors do. I also have a blog where I talk about some of the backstories behind the book, and that's trying to be a bit more connecting with popular culture. So I've got a blog on Lena Martell's One Day at a Time, if you remember that song from the 70s, and Boney M's Rivers of Babylon. So I hope the book will appeal to people who didn't think they'd ever read anything to do with the Bible. And again, that's the marketing challenge, how to reach those people. So, after all, my book isn't just about the biblical past, but it's about real people in real places here and now. And indeed, there's a Scottish flavour to the book, perhaps inevitably. So in one of the stories, Jesus is living in Edinburgh, as you do, and he goes out to the wilderness of West Lothian. Controversial. And the devil comes up to tempt him, and the devil says, "Are you not hungry?" And Jesus says, "Oh, maybe's I, maybe's no." And the devil says, "I'll give you anything you want if you'll just fall down and worship me." And Jesus says something like, "You sound just like my dad." Glasgow features too. So the Victorians set off on their steampunk adventure from Gilmore Hill, just up the hill. And then there's an insouciant would-be explorer called MacBridie, whose main claim to fame is to try and trace the source of the West Nile using only a street map. Now this is just an in-joke that people might know, because obviously this is a reference to West Nile Street, which is just a block from here in this part of the city. So finally, how did we get here then? You might be asking, how did I come to write this? Well, I guess I've been writing it in spare time and so on for more than 10 years. I think the oldest storyline is probably from more like 20 years ago. The oldest actual story in the book is they're probably just over 10 years old. And since then, I have continued to work on it, added more stories, added more links and layers and twists and so on, right up to earlier in this year. And as I say, I guess I didn't want to come across as an angry atheist. It's not so much, so the book isn't so much saying God doesn't exist or is rubbish or anything like that as such, but it's more like saying, well, hey, if God can be God, and Jesus too, maybe we could have other gods and other demigods and goddesses too. And why not? The more the merrier. And so the last phase of the book, the last quarter, opens up and considers a wider kind of polytheistic worldview, where the Judeo-Christian God is just one of the many other deities. And so there are stories like where the classical or pagan, so-called pagan gods might be sitting down to dinner and talking about world affairs, or talking about Yahweh behind his back, because he doesn't associate with them because he's monotheistic, right? And so they might think he's that awful little god over there, to whom and that undead demigod. Don't know about him. I say polytheistic, but maybe it's more polyatheistic, because I think it's really about disbelieving in many gods. And I think this is what brings us together, I hope. So I think almost everyone probably disbelieves in someone's God, right? So we can all share that experience of disbelieving in someone's God. So whether you're a believer or not, you probably disbelieve in someone, and that's what you have in common. So let's share this common ground. And the final reading is from the final story, when, as you anticipate, I'm going to introduce someone else. So I'm going to finally introduce the character of Beelzebub, who you might have been wondering about, since you learned that someone had gone and written a book about it. So this is my final reading. Oh yeah, I should say it's set in a party in Edinburgh, of all places. Okay. It was a heady mashup of a Halloween party, somewhere up behind the mound. Earth-defying aliens and born-again zombies, hipster-headed angels and devils in drag, werewolves hovering by the finger buffet. Half the people seemed to be in fancy dress, and the other half were probably just a bunch of old-town eccentrics, misfits and divinity students. Or so I supposed. There's a tap on my shoulder, and this handsome devil with a pair of horns thrusts a can of beer in my hands. Oh, thanks, I say. And who are you? I'm Satan, he says. I take a glug of my beer. Oh, and what do you do? I get about, odd jobs, mainly human resources, he says with a wink. A werewolf comes past with a plate of sausage rolls, and we help ourselves. Soon I notice another horned figure, a bit scarier looking, dressed in a rich crimson outfit with an extravagant codpiece, managing to look majestic and demonic at the same time. Then later I step outside for a breath of air, and there's this other guy outside having a cigarette. He's dressed normally enough, all in black, but there's something unsettling about him that I can't quite put my finger on. Maybe it's his dark, translucent eyes and his skin with a strange, subtle luminosity, like leather lit from within. And who are you, stranger? He says to me. I'm a first-year student. Right enough, I dig your earthling chic, he smiles. And what about you? Me, he says. I am Beelzebub, he says, eyes searing into mine. But who are you really? I ask. I'm the Lord God, he insists. And I'm thinking, not exactly how to expect to meet my maker, but then maybe a Halloween party would be as good as any place. Of course, I'm not that Lord God, he says, but my name means the Most High God. You may call me Lord and worship me if you wish. I must admit, I never really knew who Beelzebub was. Few do, he says. It's not as if I get many mentions in sermons or invitations to weddings or bar mitzvahs or funerals, funnily enough. But I actually rather like the mystery, the ambiguity of being both a devil and a god. But I thought you were a version of the devil. Ah, he says. But there's more than one devil in town. The most famous are Satan, Lucifer, and myself, Beelzebub. The unholy trinity. But we've each got our own personalities and prerogatives. Take Lucifer, guy in the fancy codpiece. He's a fallen angel whose mission is to undermine divine authority. Pretends he's a rebel, but he really just wants power to depose God and install himself in his place. And what about Satan? Oh, he's just a hired hand, one of God's henchmen. He plays the role of adversary, usually testing or tempting or punishing on behalf of the god. And what about you? Well, for many, I represent the anathema of alternative divinities. The very possibility of other gods, other moralities. A god of alternative possibilities, of plurality, diversity. Mostly good things, wouldn't you say? I'm also my own god too, with my own patch and my own Bible. It never occurred to me that Beelzebub had a Bible. But then, why not? Maybe all Canaanite gods had Bibles. They seem to be just a thing in those parts. And what's in your Bible, he says? And for that, you're going to have to find out. So I invite you, thank you for your attention, thank you for listening, and I invite you to ask any questions, and then I invite you, if you wish, there are copies for sale over there, and I'll be sitting down there as well to sign any if anyone wants any copies signed. So anyway, thank you for your attention.
Do we have any questions?
So what was the book finally classified as?
Everything that we think it will vaguely meet. But it really is a difficult thing when they have very specific genres, and a lot of our books simply don't fit into their genres. Yeah. And Stevens is a perfect example.
Right.
On Amazon, it has a ranking under something to do with spiritual and things, and there's fantasy and maybe science fiction, and so it's a mixture of those things. So someone will fit it into some of those categories, I suppose.
Yes,
good question.
Do you think it could be classed as fiction in Norway?
Well, I made it all up, so. so
you mean it wasn't divinely inspired?
I think it would be, if it was divinely inspired, it was probably
infernally
inspired. Well, oh, that's two questions. If it was divinely inspired, I would say it's probably a bit like homeopathy, you know, where it's been diluted so much through all the various incarnations. Can I say incarnation? It's been diluted so much that there might be a spark of it there. I mean, who am I to say? But not. I wouldn't say directly. And was it infernally inspired? I would say.
Infernally.
I would say probably no, more definite no, because I'm not aware of any direct influence in that from that front. I haven't had the tap on the shoulder yet.
But you would say that, wouldn't you?
Yes.
Could you describe it as a work of philosophy?
Well, probably not. I read some philosophy books last year, and they're full of they're full of sort of logical axioms and stuff like that. But I don't know. It's up to the individual. I should say at this point, it's up to the reader. The reader constructs the text, and when you read it, You will find your own meanings in it, and you will create your own philosophies out of it. So it's just waiting to happen. All right, it's between the pages, it's between the words, and it's waiting to happen. What you need to do to unlock it is to go and
Buy it.
Sorry, yes.
How did you arrive at the different voices for the book? You said there was all the different stories. Did you have a plan beforehand, or did they emerge as you?
No, I didn't have a plan. If I had a plan, I probably wouldn't be here. They arose out of the circumstances. Yeah. So in the first story, for example, there are a few characters, and they just emerged because I thought, well, the narrator is a Bible writer, or someone who gouges into the clay at least. Not necessarily an inventive storyteller, but a writer down, just operating in a new medium. So I thought, well, maybe there should be a publisher as well. So there's a publisher in the audience, and I thought there should be a practical person, like an engineer. So there's an engineer in the audience, in the story. So they just kind of emerged from the context, and there's a state theologian, there's a state astrologer, and people going off they have to go and organise the divine barbecues and orgies, as you would, when God's visiting, going to put on a show. And well, as I say, it wasn't planned. I thought, I'll write one story, see what happens, and then I'll write another one, and so on and so on. Or the second clipping that I read, the second reading that I read, so that was always going to be a story about meeting the gods-in-law. So that wrote itself in terms of who the characters were. Probably there is a sister and a brother who are just mentioned, but they weren't there, spoiling the occasion of getting in the way. So the main characters are spoke for themselves and so on. So so I don't know if that answers your question.
I was just intrigued because there were all the different sort of ways into the subject itself.
Yeah, they came from the different contexts. Yeah,
thank you.
They arose from the context.
I had one question. I know everybody asks this of authors about who inspired you. I detect a little Douglas Adams and a teeny bit maybe of Monty Python in your writing. Would that be an accurate assessment?
Well, it could be. I mean, it wasn't consciously so. Those weren't the people. Because I was thinking about, well, maybe I should be conscious of who my influences were. But those weren't. Those two particular examples weren't consciously in my mind. Of course, Douglas Adams is. I think he's in another part of my brain, the sort of science fiction part of the brain.
Yeah.
So I would certainly say he's a worthy person to be influenced by. But I think it's a broader and unprogrammed set of influences. I think that you can't necessarily predict. And I talk about one or two cases in the blog, and I've already mentioned Train Spotting, and you can't, some certain works you can't avoid being aware of, and you can't avoid being aware of the impact they can have, and being aware of what a writer can say when they set something, for example, in a local place, and they speak the language of the local people, and it feels so real. So it seemed natural to think, well, what if we put Jesus and the devil in a Edinburgh context? And incidentally, William Comyns Beaumont wrote a whole series of books where he said that the whole holy story actually took place in Edinburgh. So that's a kind of, that would be a direct influence. Not that I'm trying to emulate Mr. Comyns Beaumont, but there are already people who have written stuff like that out there, saying, well, what if Jesus was in Edinburgh? And you know, what's he doing down by the Union Canal? Where does he hang out? Does he have a girlfriend? Which team does he support? You know, so yeah. I mean, I could probably ramble on about influences for far too long, but maybe that's something to talk about later. Thank you for the question. Yes.
So, were you tempted to head off into the desert, take some dodgy mushrooms, and do your own spin in Revelations?
So Revelations, Revelations does crop up in one of the stories, namely Zombie Messiah 2. So so in one of the stories, they make a book that someone's written about Jesus, the Jewish preacher, or the Nazarene martyr, as they had called it, in this story, and someone's gone and turned it into a film and given it the Hollywood treatment, where instead of the Nazarene martyr, he becomes the zombie Messiah, and then this is the sequel, which is Zombie Messiah 2, which is the Revelation. So yes, there are horsemen of the apocalypse make a brief entry point. There are locusts with lion's teeth, and I think there's an angry lamb struggling with its smartphone. So yeah, I didn't need the mushrooms for that.
I would like you all to thank Stephen for a very enjoyable and interesting talk. As he said, I'd also like to thank Watersons because they stay open for these events. The shop is actually shut, but they're open for us, so that's incredibly kind of them. I don't think there's anybody here to actually hear me, but that doesn't matter. Stephen's books are for sale at the checkout just round that centre bit there, and he will be available at the table to sign them. Now, obviously, from what he's just said, anyone who wants to start their own religion, this is a handbook, so immediately buy it. And you're aware of the time of year, we're coming up for Christmas, so I think everyone should go out of their way to try and buy at least 100 copies for presents, and then come back and get some for yourself.
I would just add, if you're really wanting to start a religion, you could also buy this book called American Goddess by Leslie. That one's more about starting a religion.
And quite successfully, yes. Okay, well, in that case, thank you all very much. And once again, thank you for coming out this evening. Thank you.